Hi, I'm Harper. The night my parents left my sister and her babies stranded in a blizzard, they called her a disgrace and shut the door like it was nothing. No coat, no mercy, just snow, wind, and betrayal. When I found out, I drove 9 hours through that storm to reach her. I thought I was going to save her, but I didn't know what I was walking into. Now, 6 months later, I still can't close my eyes without hearing what they said, or seeing how far they were willing to go, just to erase us. Before we begin, what time is it where you are? And have you ever been forced to choose between your own blood and what's right? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. The soup had just started to simmer, potatoes softening, the faint scent of rosemary curling through my little kitchen when my phone buzzed across the counter. I didn't look right away. It was one of those quiet winter evenings where the wind rattled the windows and the snow muffled every sound, like the whole world was holding its breath. I stirred the pot gently and reached for my mug of chamomile, thinking maybe I'd finish that puzzle on the dining table after dinner. Then I saw it. One missed call. Voicemail from my niece Ellie. I pressed play without thinking, the ladle still in my hand. "Aunt Harper, please." Her voice was ragged, cut by the sound of wind and what I swear was crying in the background. "Mom, they threw her out. It's snowing so hard, I don't know what to do. They said she's a disgrace. They, they made us leave. We're outside." The message ended in static. I froze. My first thought wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Then came the sting behind my eyes. The kind you get when a truth lands so hard it knocks the wind out of your denial. I hit redial with shaking fingers. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. That's when the voice in my head, the one I'd learned to listen to after years of pretending everything was fine, told me to move. Now, I yanked the soup off the stove and dropped the ladle in the sink. The handle clanging against the porcelain, I pulled my coat from the hook, stuffed the thermos with hot tea, grabbed 2 thick blankets from the linen closet, and jammed my snow boots on. In the back of my closet, I found it, the red scarf Grandma had knitted the winter before she passed. I hadn't worn it in years, but as I tossed it into the front seat, a thought pierced me. I'd wrap it around as old as baby if I had to. That scarf had more love in its threads than any word our parents ever spoke. Outside, the wind howled like it was angry at the world. My car door groaned as I pulled it shut, snow already piling on the windshield. I punched the ignition, hands trembling. 9 hours through a Colorado blizzard. But I didn't think twice. Maya, my little sister. My stubborn, loud, beautiful Maya, who used to spin around the living room in Mom's heels and demand attention like the world owed her something. She was always the favorite. I was the quiet one, the shadow at the edge of the frame in every family photo. But now, she was the one they'd erased. And for what? Because her husband walked out on her, because she had the nerve to want better for her kids. Our parents, who cared more about appearances than people, had turned on her the moment she stopped being useful to their story. A disgrace, Ellie said. They called her. And worse. "You made your bed. Now die in it." I gritted my teeth and pushed the car forward, tires crunching over ice as I navigated the first few miles of frozen highway. The snow wasn't just falling, it was attacking. Visibility was maybe 10 if. Every few minutes I had to clear the windshield again. My fingers ached from gripping the wheel so hard. And somewhere out there, my sister was standing in that same cold with her daughters, one of them still in diapers. And little Hazel, she had asthma. What the hell were they thinking? As I drove, the miles stretched longer than they should have. My thoughts darted back and forth between now and then to the night in 5th grade when our parents forgot to pick me up from my school play. I waited outside for 2 hours in the rain. They said they were busy with his oldest piano recital. I remembered the chill in my bones, the way I watched headlights hoping they were ours, the slow realization that no one was coming. That same feeling was back now. But this time, I wasn't going to sit still and wait. Somewhere near Haven Ridge, a truck skidded into my lane. I swerved hard tires, sliding heart slamming in my chest. I managed to regain control just before hitting the guardrail, pulled over, and sat there, chest heaving, hands shaking. I closed my eyes and inhaled deep. Then the phone buzzed again. Voicemail. I hit play. Maya's voice thinner this time. He pushed the stroller, said, I wasn't part of this family anymore. Ellie's crying. Law's having trouble breathing. I don't. There was a scuffle. A loud thud, the sound of something slamming. Get off our property. Our father's voice barked in the distance, full of fury I hadn't heard since I told him I wasn't going to med school. Then only wind and sobbing. Then silence. The wind outside howled louder the closer I got to Redstone. My fingers clutched the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Not just from the storm, but from everything I'd just heard. I could still feel Maya's voice in my chest, trembling and scattered, the baby's cry fading into the static. I didn't even remember the last 30 minutes of the drive. I just knew I had to get there. When I finally turned onto the narrow gravel road that led to our parents' farmhouse, the world was still pitch black, except for the glow of the porch light. Snow had drifted so high along the edges that the mailbox looked like a child's toy buried in frosting. My headlights caught the outline of the house, and for a moment it looked exactly as it always had. White clappered, crooked porch rail smoke curling from the chimney like nothing was wrong except everything was. I slammed the car into park and jumped out. My boots sank deep into the snow. The cold hit like a slap to the lungs, sharp, raw, unforgiving. I called out, Isa, but my voice was eaten up by the wind. I stepped forward, squinting through flurries that blurred everything. Then I saw it, a shape half buried in the snowdrift at the foot of the porch stairs. At first it didn't register as human, just a lump of fabric and shadows. But then I caught the edge of the thin quilt, stiff with frost, and the tiny hand poking out. Oh God, I whispered, stumbling forward. Is Zolda? She didn't answer. I dropped to my knees beside her. Her arms were wrapped tightly around both kids. Ellie pressed to her chest, Hazel curled beneath. The baby was shivering violently, her breath rattling. Ellie's lips were cracked, her cheeks streaked with frozen tears. And Maya, her eyes were closed. Her face was ash gray, lips purple. One of her hands was uncovered, stiff and blue. I pressed my fingers to her neck, a pulse weak but there. It's okay. I've got you, I murmured, even though I didn't know if she could hear me. I peeled the blankets from my bag, wrapping them around the girls first, then draped the last one over my sister. I pulled the red scarf from my own neck and tucked it around Hazel, who whimpered and clung to it like something sacred. The porch light flickered above us. I looked up. They were watching. The living room curtain moved just a sliver, enough for me to see the shape of someone standing there. Then nothing. The curtain fell back. I waited, hoping, no begging, that one of them would open the door, step outside, show some shred of human decency. But nothing happened. I stood up, teeth clenched, and yelled toward the house. Are you kidding me? She could have died out here. Your grandkids are freezing. The door creaked open. Janet stepped out, wrapped in a heavy robe, holding a steaming mug of tea, like she was about to enjoy a cozy morning. Her face was blank, like this was just any other Sunday. If you take her, she said, her voice as cold as the air, you're on your own. We're done with all this drama. I stared at her. Drama. You threw them out in a blizzard. She brought it on herself, she said, not even glancing at the children. Divorce is a choice. Consequences come with it. I could feel something rising inside me, something sharp and ancient. You'd rather let your own grandchildren die in the snow than admit you were wrong. Behind her, I heard movement. Then our father's voice boomed from inside the house. She made her choice. We made ours. I stepped closer to the porch, eyes burning. She chose survival. You chose cruelty. Janet didn't flinch. Don't come back here looking for sympathy. Harper. You were never much different. That was it. I turned without another word, bent down, and gently lifted Maya into my arms. She was lighter than I remembered, like all the fight had been drained out of her. I guided Ellie and Hazel toward the car, keeping the blankets wrapped around them tight. The door slammed shut behind me. As I eased them into the back seat, Ellie reached for my scarf still clutched in her little hand. She looked up at me with wide, swollen eyes and whispered, "You came." I nodded, trying to smile even as my throat tightened. I slid into the driver's seat and called 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced. I gave the address, explained the situation, told them I was already driving toward the nearest hospital. And then I whispered something I hadn't dared say out loud in years. They will never touch us again. Not me, not her, not the kids. As I drove, I kept checking the rear-view mirror. Ellie's head rested on her mother's chest. Hazel was still coughing, but her eyes were open now, glassy but awake. 30 minutes later, the ER doors swung open as I ran inside, cradling the baby. Nurses rushed to take them, to bring them into warmth and light. One of them pulled me aside gently, her eyes serious. "You're lucky," she said. A few more hours, the baby's lungs would have collapsed. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, someone reported me for kidnapping. The waiting room was a blur of pale lighting and antiseptic silence. I sat slouched in one of the hard plastic chairs, clutching a cup of lukewarm hospital that didn't warm anything but my palms. Outside, the wind still pushed sheets of snow against the big pane windows, and the plows hadn't even reached this far out yet. Maya was stable, they said. Hazel had been given oxygen, and Ellie, bless her heart, hadn't let go of my scarf until the nurse gently peeled it from her fingers. I thought that would be the worst of it. I thought we were past the point of danger. Then a woman in a navy cardigan and a thin folder under her arm approached. She looked like someone from a library kind, even until she said, "Harpery Morgan." I stood instinctively. Yes. She showed me her badge. "I'm with Child and Family Services. I need to speak with you." My heart stuttered. "About what?" "There's been a report filed, claiming you abducted 2 minor children without the custodial parents' consent." "What?" My voice cracked like ice underfoot. She spoke gently, like I was already guilty, but she didn't want to make a scene. "The report came in this morning. The grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, said they witnessed you remove the children from their property in the middle of the night without permission." I blinked at her, disbelief swelling in my chest like nausea. "That's not what happened. Maya is their mother. She was unconscious in the snow. I brought her and the kids here to save their lives." The woman's eyes didn't shift. "Is your sister able to verify that she's sedated?" I answered. "She barely regained consciousness. She's in no state to answer questions." "We still need to speak with her," she said. "The report accuses you of acting on your own without regard for the children's well-being." The coffee slipped in my hand and spilled onto the floor unnoticed. I sat down slowly, suddenly unsteady. I'd known my parents were harsh, controlling, but they were trying to flip this, turn what I'd done, what I had to do, into a weapon. And the worst part, they knew exactly how to do it. As I watched the social worker walk toward the nurse's station, something inside me cracked. Not from shock, but from recognition. Because I'd seen this kind of twist before. 6 months ago at Thanksgiving, we'd all gathered in that same cold house, same 2 clean living room, with stiff chairs and conversations so tight they could cut glass. My father had stood up, glass in hand, and gave a toast. To family, he'd said, and to those who honor it with loyalty and commitment. Like Ethan. He'd nodded toward Maya's husband, a man who provides, protects, and stays. He hadn't looked at me when he said it. He hadn't needed to. That night, I'd gone to the kitchen for water and heard raised voices upstairs. I knew that tone. I'd heard it enough in my own former marriage to recognize the slither underneath it. When I stepped quietly closer to the stairs, I'd caught a word. "Don't raise your voice at me," Maya had said. And then a crash, something breaking. I went to her the next day. She was wearing sunglasses indoors. I asked her softly if he'd done something. She didn't deny it. I told Mom and Dad, she whispered. They said, some things are better kept behind closed doors. I'd carried that with me ever since. Not just the memory, but the message. Their silence wasn't passive. It was policy. It was protection for appearances, for status, for a twisted idea of dignity. Now here we were. The nurse came over and gently laid a hand on my shoulder. Your sister's asking for you. I followed her down the corridor past sterile doors and humming machines until I stepped into the dim room. Maya's face looked better. Pink was returning to her cheeks, but she still looked hollow, like someone who'd run out of reserves. She reached for my hand. They're trying to take the girls, aren't they? I nodded. They filed a report. Said I took them without permission. Her jaw trembled. They tried to take custody last month. I froze. What filed an emergency petition? She rasped. Told the court I was unstable. Said the divorce made me irrational. That I was exposing the kids to danger. I felt the ground tilt under me. They're trying to erase you. She nodded, eyes glassy. They don't care about me. They never did. They just want control. And they'll burn everything down to keep it. I sat with her in silence for a long time. Then I stepped out into the hallway and pulled out my phone. Annalise, I said when my old college roommate picked up. I need your help. You're still with that family law firm, right? She didn't ask questions, just said, tell me everything. I told her about the night, the porch, the frost, the baby barely breathing, and now this. When I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking. I looked down and noticed the scarf, my red scarf, still tied around my wrist. It was damp-stained from the snow and tears, but it was warm. It was still warm. I tightened the knot. I wasn't going anywhere. Then a police officer stepped into the lobby, scanning the room. Ma'am, he called out. I need to speak with you about the child endangerment report. And just like that, I wasn't just the rescuer anymore. I was now the accused. I followed the officer through the quiet hospital corridor, each step echoing louder than it should. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, the kind of sound that burrowed into your skull and stayed there. I was still damp from the storm, my boots leaving faint slush marks on the linoleum floor. At the lobby, he nodded toward the doors. We'll need to ask you a few questions. You can ride with me or follow in your own car. I glanced toward the pediatric wing where Maya and the girls were still recovering. I didn't want to leave them, but I also knew what refusing looked like. I nodded. I'll come with you. The ride was silent. I sat in the back seat, hands clenched in my lap, watching the snow-covered trees blur past. My red scarf, now crusted at the ends with frost, rested across my lap like a forgotten relic. By the time we reached the station, the sun was just beginning to rise behind the clouds, casting a pale, dull light across the icy lot. The officer led me inside and into a small room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a mirror. I didn't need anyone to tell me was two-sided. I sat. My coat was still wet, and the chill from the storm hadn't left my skin. The officer, a tall man named Ramos, sat down a thin folder. He wasn't unfriendly, but he carried the professional blankness of someone who'd heard every story and no longer reacted. He adjusted the folder, flipped it open, and began. The report says the children were taken from their grandparents' home around midnight during a heated dispute. The grandmother claims you acted without warning and have a documented history of erratic behavior. I blinked. Excuse me. He didn't look up. She mentioned an incident from your college years. Something about an emotional breakdown. I felt my stomach twist. That was over a decade ago, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I was struggling after a breakup in finals. I trusted my mother with that. She was the only one I told. He finally met my eyes. She said she feared for the children's safety if left in your care. I pressed my palm against the cold metal table. Do I look unstable to you right now, officer? I drove through a blizzard to keep my sister and her daughters alive. When I found them, they were half frozen, sitting on the porch in socks and pajamas. He nodded slowly. I'm just here to collect the statements. My sister's recovering. The toddler had blue lips when I picked her up. Do you want photos? I have photos. I didn't kidnap anyone. I rescued them. He let out a quiet breath. And the argument the grandparents referred to. There was no argument, I said flatly. I knocked. No one answered. Maya was collapsed in the snow. I wrapped her in my coat and carried the girls to the car. He wrote something down, then asked, Are you aware your parents are filing not just for custody, but also a temporary restraining order against both you and your sister? That stunned me into silence. They're citing disturbance of family peace, he added, and claiming the children are being exposed to emotional instability. I laughed once bitterly. So now telling the truth is disturbing their peace. He didn't answer. And that's when I realized they weren't just defending their actions. They were rewriting the story, painting themselves as victims protectors of family order, while casting us, me the responsible one, as the problem. My mind drifted back to a church event 2 years ago. I'd shown up alone. My parents had been hosting some kind of fundraiser for community unity. I remember my mother clutching her pearls as she introduced herself to strangers. We're the Bennett family, she said proudly. We've always stood for unity, commitment, legacy. Our girls were raised in the tradition of loyalty and grace. Then she'd leaned toward me between bites of lemon bar and whispered, You could still remarry. You know it's not too late. No one wants a woman who's alone for too long. And to Maya later, as we loaded casseroles into the car, Ethan might have lost his way, but he's still your husband. A family isn't a thing you just abandon when it gets uncomfortable. I remember staring at her then, the way she could wield a smile like a blade. And I realized something in that moment, sitting in the harsh lighting of the interrogation room. Maybe they never protected us at all? Maybe they were just protecting the image of us. My childhood came flooding back. The tight ponytails, the ironed Sunday dresses, the rules about sitting straight, speaking softly, and always smiling even when it hurt. Silence wasn't just preferred. It was demanded. Now that same silence had become a weapon pointed right at us. I glanced up at the mirror on the wall. My reflection stared back paler than I remembered. The red scarf was still there, but this time wrapped tightly at my neck. Not like comfort, more like restraint. That same scarf I'd wrapped around Ellie when we ran to the car. That same scarf I wore the night my parents called my sister a disgrace and left her in the snow. The door clicked open, snapping me out of the spiral. Officer Ramos returned, handed me a paper, and said, You're not being charged, but they've initiated emergency custody proceedings. You'll want to get a lawyer. I nodded numbly and stepped outside into the gray morning. The snow had turned to slush. I was halfway across the parking lot when my phone rang. His oldest name flashed across the screen. I answered quickly. Hey, I'm on my way back. Her voice cut through, brittle and scared. Harper. They're coming for the kids. A social worker just left. They filed for emergency removal today. I stopped walking. My scarf. My breath. My hope all caught midair. I barely remember the drive back to the motel. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, and the dashboard lights blurred through a sheen of exhaustion. The call from Maya kept replaying in my head. They're coming for the kids. A social worker just left. When I pulled into the lot, the sky had faded to a flat gray wash. No sun, no snow, just that eerie, suspended quiet that comes after a storm. But before another kind begins, I shut off the engine and sat still for a moment, letting the heater run as I looked down at the grocery bag in the passenger seat. It held only the basics: instant oatmeal, applesauce, milk, crackers, but it felt heavier than it should have. Maybe because I knew it wouldn't be enough. Inside the motel room smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet. The light above the nightstand flickered, casting long shadows that made everything feel smaller. Maya was lying curled on the far bed the girls tangled beside her under a thin comforter. Her face was pale. She didn't even look up when I came in. "I got some food," I said softly, setting the bag on the dresser. She gave the slightest nod, her eyes half closed. We didn't talk much. I poured juice into a plastic cup, warmed a packet of oatmeal in the microwave, then broke crackers into tiny pieces for Ellie to nibble when she stirred. We sat in silence, listening to the hum of the heater and the occasional thump of footsteps in the hallway outside. When Maya finally looked at me, her voice was a thread. "Do you think they'll take them?" I paused, my spoon halfway to my mouth. "Not without a fight." But even as I said it, something inside me twisted. Because this wasn't just about outrage anymore. It wasn't even about what was fair. It was about power. Who had it? Who could bend the rules, and who they got to crush under the pretense of family values. After dinner, I stepped into the bathroom. I needed a minute. I closed the door, gently flipped on the fan, and sat down hard on the edge of the tub. Then I slid down to the tile floor and let my head rest against the cool ceramic. My breath came in shallow waves. I'd been trying to be smart, calm, calculated. I'd reasoned with them, showed compassion, and still they twisted everything I did and everything I was into a threat. They were using the system like a crowbar to pry us apart one paper at a time. I covered my mouth with my hand as if that could hold in the ache rising in my chest. And just like that, I was 10 years old again. I'd knocked over a porcelain vase, some heirloom from my mother's side, while dusting the dining room shelves. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Within hours, I was summoned to the living room, where the entire extended family had gathered after Sunday lunch. I stood there trembling while my father talked about accountability and discipline and consequences for disrespect. My mother nodded solemnly, her arms crossed. No one asked me if I was okay, or if maybe I needed a hug, or if I was just scared. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was a blemish. They were publicly scrubbing out. Even then, I learned love in our house was conditional, performance-based. You got grace when you played the part, but if you faltered even by accident, you were punished until you learned to smile through it. I blinked back, tears, suddenly angry at myself for still carrying those memories like sacred truth. When I opened the bathroom door again, the room had dimmed. Maya was asleep now, one hand resting on little Issa's back. Ellie had rolled over, her cheek pressed against my scarf, folded up like a makeshift pillow under her head. Somehow, in the blur of our escape, it had ended up in the bed with them. That scarf had been wrapped around my neck when I scooped them off that frozen porch. It had caught sleep, and tears, and the breath of two babies clinging to life. Now it cradled one of them like it was meant to. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched them sleep. The silence was heavy but not empty. It held everything I hadn't said aloud. The fear, the guilt, the quiet scream that maybe this was all my fault. What if I'd made it worse? What if, by rushing in, I'd handed our parents the ammunition they needed? I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Was I wrong to come?" No answer, of course, just the slow rhythm of toddler breaths and the hum of the old radiator kicking in. I stood and gently pulled the scarf from under Ellie's head, smoothing it in my lap before folding it carefully. I pressed it flat with my palms, not like a keepsake, more like a flag I wasn't ready to raise just yet, but wasn't going to bury either. "If they want war," I whispered, laying the scarf beside my sister's head, "they'll get a war, but not the kind they expect." I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I saw her name. Alyssa Bainbridge. She used to braid my hair in high school choir. Then she went off to law school and built a name for herself in corporate litigation. We hadn't spoken in years, but right now I needed someone who knew what it meant to be underestimated and someone who didn't owe my parents anything. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. "Harper." "Hey," I said, my voice. "I need a favor." I need to find every legal document my parents have signed in the last 15 years, especially anything involving guardianship trusts or real estate. There was a pause. Then, what's going on, I'll explain later, I said. But also, can you check something for me? I need to know exactly how the family trust was set up. I think they've made a mistake. And if they did, I let the silence hang between us. Got it, Alyssa said, her tone shifting. I'm on it. I ended the call and leaned back against the wall phone in my lap, staring at the crack in the ceiling above me. Because if they were going to drag us through the fire, I'd make sure they burned for it too. The call with Alyssa ended just before dawn. I didn't sleep. I sat near the heater scarf still folded in my lap, watching the window blur with freezing mist. By the time light began to creep through the slits in the blinds, I'd packed a change of clothes, kissed Maya's forehead, and left the girls still curled like commas beneath the blanket. Alyssa had already texted, "Meet me at the office. A coffee's on." I arrived just after 7. Her office sat on the second floor of an old brick building near the courthouse. Quiet, unassuming, the kind of place where serious things happened behind closed doors. Alyssa opened the door, barefoot cardigan slipping off one shoulder, legal pads stacked high on the desk behind her. "I started digging at 3:00 a.m., she said, waving me inside. "Hope you brought patience." I nodded. "And stubbornness." We spent hours sifting through scanned files, dusty binders, and old PDFs from her server. My family's estate documents were cleaner than I expected, almost too clean, the kind of clean that only comes when someone has something to hide. Then, buried halfway into a scanned folder labeled Archived Grandpa Estate 2006, we found it. An old amendment to the family trust, barely a page long. Simple language signed by my grandfather before his death and never updated afterward. If any beneficiary is declared unfit to parent or manage minor heirs, it read, all assigned benefits shall transfer in full to the next blood relative with full-time custodial guardianship of said minors. I stared at the line for a long time. They never amended it. Alyssa shook her head slowly. If your parents proceed with their claim that Maya is unfit and succeed, this clause kicks in, and by default, you get everything. Full trust rights, property oversight, even the vote on family holdings. I let that sink in. So in their scramble to punish her, they may have handed it all to me. They have no idea, I whispered. They don't read the fine print, Alyssa replied. But you do. The words lit something in me. A slow, quiet fire. Not rage, not even revenge, just clarity. We printed 3 copies, notarized them, and I signed the first petition to file for temporary guardianship. The silence in the room as I signed was sharp. Final. Later we left the building together, paper folder tucked under my arm. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty except for a few frost-covered sedans and a single black SUV. Too new, too polished for this sleepy part of town. My stomach sank. They were standing by the back of the car. My father in his long wool coat. My mother in that beige scarf she always clutched like pearls when she needed to look respectable. Their eyes found me in unison. My father's mouth curled, still playing Rescuer Harper. My mother smiled, too sweet. You always did love the role of martyr. How exhausting it must be, constantly cleaning up her messes. I didn't flinch, just walked toward them, slow and calm. Actually, I said, I'm just doing what you taught me, using rules to protect power. My mother's eyebrows knit together, the smile slipping. I kept my gaze on my father. Only difference is, I actually read the fine print. He stiffened. His face, usually so composed, lost color. My mother grabbed his arm. And I didn't tremble. I didn't yell. I didn't even smile. I just watched them like someone seeing the ocean go still after years of storms. For the first time in my adult life, they didn't have a script. They didn't know what came next. I walked past them, not a glance back, and Alyssa caught up with me as I reached her car. She glanced at me sideways. That was chilling. I didn't answer, just opened the passenger door and sat down, heart thudding with something new. Not fear, not triumph, just purpose. As Alyssa started the engine, I pulled my scarf from my bag and tied it around the handle instead of my neck. It fluttered there in the wind, worn, frayed, still damp from the motel room heater, but no longer a shield. Now it was a banner. We were halfway out of the lot when Alyssa glanced at me again. "You know, if you file that petition, they'll retaliate hard, right?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm counting on it." I sat back in the passenger seat, barely hearing the sound of the door closing beside me. The folder lay on my lap, still warm from Alyssa's printer. My fingers traced the edge of the trust clause, the one that if fate held could shift everything. But fate wasn't the only thing in play. Alyssa glanced over. "You ready?" I nodded once. "Let's go." The courthouse looked different that afternoon. Less intimidating, more performative, like a stage dressed for a play no one rehearsed, but everyone pretended they had. Inside, the hearing room was colder than I remembered, even with the heater humming in the corner. My parents were already seated at the table to the left. Their attorney, Mr. called her, stood stiff beside them, papers arranged like weapons on the desk. My mother wore a soft lavender blouse. My father had on the same navy suit he wore to my college graduation, the one where he walked out before my name was even called. Alyssa and I took our place on the opposite side. She opened her binder with practiced calm. I stayed silent, holding the one page that could rewrite everything. When the judge entered, everyone rose. His voice was steady, polite. "We're here to assess temporary guardianship over minors E and H Carver, currently residing with Ms. Harper E. Carver, in light of the family's request for legal reallocation." Alyssa stood first. "Your Honor, before proceeding, we ask the court to review a clause in the family trust updated in 2006. This clause clearly states that if a family member is deemed unfit to parent minors' guardianship and trust control transfer automatically to the next of kin with full-time care responsibilities." She passed the document forward. The judge scanned the page, adjusted his glasses, and looked up. "This hasn't been overridden." "No, Your Honor," Alyssa said. "It stands as last executed and notarized." A beat of silence stretched just long enough for a sliver of hope to reach me. Then Calder stood. "With respect, Your Honor, we have here a signed waiver dated 2014 where Ms. Carver voluntarily relinquished any claim to guardianship, citing personal health concerns." My head snapped up. He pulled out another document. My signature stared back at me, tilted, careful and unmistakably mine. "Only I never signed that." I looked to Alyssa, but she was already speaking. "Your Honor, we contest the authenticity of this document. My client has no recollection of ever signing such a waiver, and we request a handwriting and forensic document analysis before it can be considered." The judge frowned. "In that case, we'll adjourn for verification. No actions will be taken until authenticity is confirmed." Gavel. Silence, then chairs scraping as everyone rose. As we packed up, my mother passed by. Close enough to smell her rose perfume. Close enough to hear her whisper like a serpent. "You think you're the smart one. We've been playing this game longer than you've been breathing." I didn't look at her. Didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked. We left through the side hallway, the echo of footsteps bouncing down the tile. Once outside, I leaned against the cold brick wall, chest tight. That signature, I knew they'd lie. I just didn't think they'd lie that well. Hours passed. I don't remember the drive, just that it was raining by the time we reached the community center. Maya had arranged a meeting with a social worker there to talk through next steps for housing schooling, all the pieces of her life they'd tried to rip from her. I stayed in the car, staring through the windshield. Raindrops danced on the glass like 1,000 silent questions. What now? If I pushed harder, they'd spin it, make me look like a power-hungry niece stealing children and trust funds. But if I backed off, they'd win again. They always won. The silence felt like drowning in fog. Then movement. A flicker through the shelter window. A teenage girl, maybe 14, sitting near the heater, arms crossed over her chest. Her wrists were bare except for a few dark marks peeking beneath her sleeves. She looked up and caught my eye through the glass. Didn't look away. I didn't move at first, but then I reached for the scarf in my bag, the one I used to shield myself when everything felt too raw. I walked into the center, approached her, slowly knelt beside her chair. "You okay?" I asked gently. She didn't answer, just stared at me. I held out the scarf, wrapping it lightly around her shoulders. "You'll be okay. Don't let them make you small." She blinked at me once and nodded. That was all. Outside, the rain hadn't let up, but I felt warmer. Not comforted, just steady. The scarf no longer belonged to me. It had become something else. Alyssa was waiting by the car when I returned. "You sure you're ready for what's next?" I looked at her. My voice didn't shake this time. "If they want war in the dark, I'll bring fire to the courtroom." I stepped back in the passenger seat, barely hearing the sound. Air bit at my cheeks, and flakes of snow drifted down softly, just like the first night this all began. Alyssa walked beside me, coat buttoned to her throat, carrying our files. Her jaw was set. "They brought press today," she murmured. "3 outlets, maybe more." "Let them watch," I said. "Let them all watch." Inside the courthouse, the gallery was already full. Neighbors, lawyers, reporters with notepads perched on their knees. The judge's bench looked smaller today. Or maybe I was just no longer the woman who walked in here hoping for fairness. Today, I came for truth. My parents were seated already, their attorney at their side, smug as ever. My mother looked perfectly composed, a soft wool shawl wrapped over her shoulders, her hands folded just so. My father had on the same silver tie he wore to every family function, as though this too were just another formal occasion. The judge cleared his throat. "We are reconvened for final consideration of guardianship and trust reassignment. Does either party have additional evidence before we proceed to ruling?" I stood. "Your Honor, we do." Alyssa handed me the folder. "We call a witness. Notary Public Patricia Langford. She's been flown in this morning at our request." A rustle of whispers moved across the room. The woman who stepped up looked plain, maybe late 50s, dressed in a beige coat and navy slacks. She adjusted her glasses, raised her right hand, and took the oath. "Ms. Langford, your notary stamp appears on a document submitted by the opposing party, one that claims I relinquished all guardianship rights. Can you tell us, did you notarize that document?" She glanced at the judge, then straight at me. "No, I did not," she said. "That's my stamp. But I've never met this woman before today. I never witnessed her signature." The room went quiet, and then a murmur broke out. A wave of disbelief rolling across the rows. Calder stood sharply. "Objection. This is slanderous." "Sit down," the judge said flatly. The air in the room changed. You could feel it, like when a storm rolls in and the sky goes still. Alyssa stepped forward. "Your Honor, in addition to the notary's testimony, we have geotagged photos of Ms. Denslone's location on the date in question. She was in New York attending a symposium. She could not have signed any document in Oregon." The judge flipped through the packet. I watched his eyebrows lift, then tighten. He turned to my parents' table. "I have no choice but to invalidate the amendment. The original trust clause stands. Legal guardianship and oversight will be granted to Ms. Harpery Carver, effective immediately." Gasps, a few claps, quickly silenced. I felt my knees buckle a little, but I didn't fall. Then I looked across at my parents and I said, "One more thing, Your Honor." He paused. "Go ahead." My sister Maya Carver filed a restraining order 3 days ago based on verbal threats captured during a call with our parents. From my coat pocket, I pulled the recorder. I pressed play. My mother's voice came through, sharp and unmistakable. You think having kids makes you strong, you're nothing but dead weight. I'll freeze you out for good. Gasps again. Even the court stenographer looked up. The judge held up his hand. That's enough. He stared at my parents like he was seeing through them. I believe we're done here. Court orders will reflect that Mr. and Mrs. Carver must complete psychological counseling before seeking visitation. Until further notice, contact is prohibited. No one moved. No one even breathed. And just like that, it was over. Outside, the sky had opened just slightly. The snowfall was soft, almost peaceful. The reporters hovered near the steps, unsure whether to approach. Maya came out with the girls tucked in either arm. She looked like she hadn't slept, but her face was light-free. And then I saw her. Sophie, my niece, maybe 5, clutching that scarf again. She looked at me and smiled. This small, crooked, quiet smile. That was the moment, not the ruling, not the judge's words. That as we walked to the car, I didn't speak to my parents. Didn't need to. My silence said enough. I had learned something in all of this. They didn't lose because I fought harder. They lost because I chose something they never would. Truth over fear. The snow picked up again as I got into the car. The heat hummed to life. My phone buzzed. A text lit up on the screen. From my mother. 4 words. You'll regret this forever. I looked out the windshield. Maybe I would, but it wouldn't stop me. I stared at the message on my phone for a long time. You'll regret this forever. But the screen dimmed and I didn't reply. 6 months passed. The season shifted again. The court case faded into a memory most folks were too polite or too uncomfortable to mention anymore. But its imprint lingered in ways you couldn't always point to. Sometimes it showed up in how Maya flinched at sudden knocks. Sometimes in how I'd wake up at 3:00 a.m. heart-pounding, wondering if we'd really made it out. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind where everything moves slower and the coffee smells stronger, just because you brewed it in peace. I was sitting at the kitchen table peeling an orange for Sophie, while the twins were still upstairs getting ready. Maya hummed as she poured cereal into bowls. Her hair tied back, the tension in her shoulders finally softened. The kitchen was small, rental small, but it was ours. The walls were a pale blue, and there was a sun-faded magnet on the fridge that read, "Progress, not perfection." We didn't talk much about our parents anymore, not out of forgiveness. No, that wasn't the word. It was something else. A kind of acceptance that some explanations never come, and when they don't, silence can be more healing than answers that never satisfy. I glanced at the wall near the hallway. The shadow box hung quietly there. Inside it, the scarf I'd worn the night I drove through the storm folded carefully. Beside it, a small note I'd written to myself one sleepless night. You don't owe anyone your silence. I looked back at Sophie, her fingers sticky from the orange face lit with a messy grin. Auntie, can we go to the park? Maya and I exchanged a glance. I smiled. Shoes on, jacket zipped. We'll leave in 5. It was a short walk, just a few blocks, but enough time for Sophie to skip ahead and point out every squirrel and oddly shaped cloud along the way. The park was mostly empty, a few joggers, one older couple reading on a bench. The air was crisp, not cold, a Oregon spring pretending to be summer. We sat on the edge of the sandbox while the girls played. Maya leaned back, her hands buried in the sleeves of her sweater. You know, she said softly. They never even tried to apologize. I know. The paper called me a disgrace for getting divorced, said you were ungrateful for dragging family business into court. I let out a dry chuckle. And then, there were the ones who whispered they admired us. Funny how it's always the whispers, never the loud voices, that carry the truth. She nodded. Does it ever bother you I thought about that? Not anymore. I spent too long living for the approval of people who'd never truly see me. Now, I just live. We sat in that silence for a while, watching the girls chase each other with dandelions and pebbles. life in its simplest form. Our parents didn't go to jail. There were no handcuffs, no flashing headlines, just the slow collapse of everything they'd built. The church committee asked them to step down. The nonprofit they ran quietly closed their donors, drifting away without a word. Some people get punished by the law, others by the truth, but most by time. And time had been speaking louder than any court ruling ever could. I saw it in the way they avoided town events and how old friends looked away when their names came up. Reputation's a fragile thing, hard-earned, easily shattered. I didn't gloat. That wasn't what this was ever about. I'd saved my sister not to prove something, not to be a hero. I did it because I knew what it felt like to be left behind. And I couldn't bear to watch someone else drown in that kind of cold. Across the park, Sophie waved at me, giggling. She held up a little bouquet of crushed flowers and shouted, "For you, Auntie." I waved back, heart-tugging in that strange, quiet way healing does. Not flashy, not triumphant, just steady. Maya turned to me. "You ever wonder if they regret it?" I breathed in, felt the air move through my chest like a question I no longer needed answered. "I think they regret losing control, not losing us." Maya nodded, eyes fixed on the children. "We don't talk about the blizzard much," she said. "No, but it changed everything." She didn't reply. She didn't have to. Some things didn't need to be spoken aloud anymore, not because they weren't important, but because they'd already taken root deep and unshakable. As the sun dipped just slightly behind the trees, I felt a peace settle over me. Not perfect, not painless, but real. Would you ever speak up against your own family knowing it might break everything? Have you ever had to choose between what's easy and what's right? I did, and I'd do it again. Because sometimes the ones who survive aren't the ones who scream the loudest, but the ones who walk straight into the storm and refuse to leave someone alone in